easier for you, Jim, would like to write a book like that, like during that period where you don't have you don't have smartphones, you don't have technology. Probably easier to tell a story that way, right?
I don't know. I've done both. I've kept up with uh, some of my more recent books have all that kind of crap in them, and I adapt okay. It's no, it isn't easier to tell a story really. It's just different.
It's interesting though to write in period, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, I've done that. In fact, we were talking off camera about the Philadelphia botanist William Bartram exploring the St. Johns River and in Florida in the very early 1800s when there was nothing there. And I was inspired by reading about Bartram and other early American naturalists to write a novel that was set in 1805, I believe, about these two bumbling botanists who are sent into the southern wilderness by Thomas Jefferson to find something that's not there. Um, Thomas Jefferson, it's a long story I won't go into, but um, they didn't know much about what was going on in the interior of North America. And when Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark out to go to reach the Pacific, he gave them instructions to keep their eyes peeled for mastodons because Jefferson and a lot of other educated people thought that there were probably large unknown animals out in the American interior. Um, the When Jefferson was at Monticello, his fellow farmers in the surrounding area used to bring him things like boxes of bones. And one farmer brought him this box of bones that uh, Jefferson pored over, and he was a member of the International Natural Philosophy Gang. These are the early scientists, sort of the larval scientific community of Western Civ. And he got this box of bones from a farmer, and he thought it was a species previously unknown, which he named Megalonyx, because this was also the great age of taxonomy, when Carl Linnaeus in Sweden started this system for identifying the genus and species of animals. So it became a great privilege and honor to name a species. So Jefferson named this animal Megalonyx and theorized that it was a giant lion. And a few months later, he got a publication from Europe that said it was a scientific paper from France that said the French naturalist Georges Cuvier had found an identical skeleton in Paraguay, and he had identified it correctly as a giant sloth. So Jefferson sends my two characters out into the wilderness to find a giant sloth and bring it back. Well, Lewis and Clark are going out to the Pacific to discover the Pacific Ocean. And that's the premise of my book, An Embarrassment of Riches, published, I think, in 1985. And it's a comedy. And of course, my characters never really catch a giant sloth because they're not there. But they do have numerous misadventures. They're captured by river pirates on the Ohio River. And then subsequently, my characters and the pirates who captured them are all captured by the Shawnee Indians. And they escape the Shawnee Indians during an eclipse of the sun. And they're back on the river, and they end up at a strange place in the Tennessee River where a uh, a French emigre from the Revolution has established this log castle floating in the middle of the Tennessee River. And on each side of the river, he's running these hemp plantations with black slave labor and Choctaw Indian overseers. And it turns out that he's a Frenchman who's left France during the Revolution, and now it's a few years after that. It's a couple of decades after that, and he's hiding on board his floating log mansion, the son of King Louis the XVI, the Dauphin, the crown prince, who is now a grown man, but something of a kind of an imbecile. And so they have adventures with him. and eventually they're back on the river, and they finally end up not far from you, Matt, in the vicinity of Biloxi, Mississippi, on the Gulf Coast, where they've discovered a tribe of blue-eyed, blonde-haired Indians who are wearing ruffed collars and speaking in iambic pentameter. And it turns out that they're the descendants of the lost colony of Roanoke, and they have forgotten who they are. They don't know that they're the descendants of a lost colony of Englishmen, but they're at war with all the other tribes in the neighborhood and with the Spaniards who are constantly patrolling the coast.
So what year does this take place?
1805.
And what Roanoke was like 150 years before that?
That was in the 1600s, I believe, or 1500s, 1500s.
Yeah,
15, maybe
I've
1580 or something like that.
way in the back of my mind that it'll never happen. And, if anybody else writes it, it's fine. I love alternate history.
Yeah,
And there's some great writers in alternate history and like embellished history.
yeah,
But I wish that there was somebody to write about the Vikings getting to North America, but at a better place, where they were well received.
yeah,
If they had just sailed a little bit further south, if Vikings had landed in Long Island,
yeah.
you know, they would have brought the wheel and iron making and all of these
They
things,
they would have been playing polo by 1600.
but before Christianity.
Yeah,
They could have opened up America before they were even Christianized.
yep.
And,
Oh well.
we're off to the races. But the Southeast, the history in the Southeast, there's everybody does tons of all the movies, maybe because it's easy to film. The spaghetti westerns were in Italy and Spain.
Hmm.
Then Hollywood, they filmed out west. But some of the biggest things that happened in American history, like the Choctaw Wars, the Davy Crockett, Andrew Jackson era, which is like Mississippi and Alabama, there's no movies on that.
Yeah, very
Just
little.
none.
Yeah. The
It's
original
covered.
Walt Disney Davy Crockett movie or series did feature a lot about the Red Sticks and that war.
There's some
But
stuff later that, like, even um in Mark Twain's books, and and it's funny, the Duke and the Dolphin, right? In that,
yeah, yeah, the
but
Duff.
that side story. But the that the traders and the riverboats, you don't see much of that. The Revenant, which is a fictionalized version with
DiCaprio.
DiCaprio, it's like, stay on the boat. It's just like Apocalypse Now. Stay on the boat. Don't
Yeah.
get off the boat. I I was watching that and I was flashing back to Apocalypse Now. Stay on the boat.
Yeah.
You've got a floating fort. Don't go anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole era, the river boats and that exploration, the Southeast was opened up, and it was in many ways not America's proudest moment in terms of those wars. They were like wars of extinction, man. They were like
Yeah, and they eventually just moved the Cherokees, straight out of Georgia all the way to Oklahoma.
but the actual wars in the early part of the 19th century to make Mississippi safe for white men, they were brutal,
Yeah.
and Davy Crockett and them were part of it. But yeah, that whole episode, I was out on a local creek with my son last weekend while the fall colors are really great. I actually posted something on YouTube for the first time in years, but you know, just with a little outboard motorboat, creeks that don't see anybody in a year. I mean, nobody, where the trees are on both sides. That was a lot of the South. That was, Indians paddling canoes. You used the term before, hummock. The like an island in the middle of swamp or other,
Yeah,
or a
grassy.
river, just a low dry area. But yeah, the whole and North Florida in particular, this whole Southeast, full of springs. So this really was an ideal place for human habitation. They had to make some accommodations though, because of the mosquitoes and so forth. So I guess they didn't worry about dying of lung cancer because you could die of so many other things. But to keep mosquitoes away, they'd always have like a smudge fire going. So in your TP or Wiki Up or whatever they had, you'd be breathing smoke all the time.
Hmm.
That or mosquitoes. But they probably weren't worried about lung cancer at 50 if you weren't going to make it to, 40.
Yeah.
But deer everywhere, water everywhere, food growing everywhere. Ideal habitat. The American Southeast really is, it's a wonderful place. I wonder what it's going to look like in 100 years, who's going to populate it, and is there going to be an electrical grid, or is it going to be back to canoes and paddles? I mean,
There was a novel set in Florida called Fiscadoro. I forget the name of the writer who wrote it. Came out about 20, 25 years ago.
I did read
And
that.
yeah, it was
On your recommendation, yeah.
it was an apocalyptic novel of a future Florida scene well past the kind of economic collapse.
Yeah.
And that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, because when people talk about Florida, I always have to say what part of Florida, because Florida above Orlando, which is the I-4 from like Daytona Beach to Tampa, the north part of Florida is not built out. There's still plenty of, Florida at one point had more cattle than Texas
Mhm.
because, well, in an acre of Florida grassland, you could have 10 times the cattle of an acre of, dry Texas cattle country. So all of that territory, Gainesville, University of Florida, Tallahassee, all of that is buildable land. When you go below Orlando, it's basically a swamp with an archipelago. So everybody from south of Orlando is essentially living on a rimland, like an archipelago with a lagoon that's the Everglades. So there's millions and millions of people in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Tampa, Naples, that whole area, but there's no more land. They're out of land, and the water has to be piped into them. They've got a big nuke plant in south of Miami, but if anything goes haywire in Florida, south of Orlando is going to be totally untenable.
Oh dear.
But yeah, because they just so many people crammed into a strip of land where everything that they eat is brought in on a truck. The power is brought in, the water is brought in. It's a totally artificial environment.
By the
Like
way, that
it's
book,
Like Phoenix in a different way.
Fiscadora was by Dennis Johnson, one N in Dennis.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I was just gonna say that. Um, the yeah, Florida and Arizona, south of Orlando, there's a lot of parallels. And I'll tell you though, I wonder if this is happening in Florida and other parts of the Southeast. They are building so much in Phoenix right now, it's insane. Tearing up what's
Well,
left of the desert.
Housing is staying on the market here in Florida. I think that and I like it. I watch the real estate people and that you've had on. When real estate turns over and starts heading down, it's one of the biggest drivers of the overall real world economy, not New York financialization economy, Nvidia $1 trillion or whatever. At the retail economy level, houses staying on the market is like a depression signal, or at least a recession signal, because you can't you can't trade your house and move when your house is worth less and you owe more. When you're upside down, and when the average mortgage holder becomes upside down, they're really screwed for moving, and it like locks up the entire market. It just becomes impossible to buy a new house leveraging the greater value of your present house when your present house is worth less. So houses down here are staying on the market for a year, and so building is stopping, and uh, there's I saw from Charlotte, all the illegal aliens being off the work site means these big office buildings aren't going to be built. Who is going to go into those office buildings if they had been finished? You know, in Florida, Florida is on a little bit different of a time scale because sometimes you can have a hurricane hit in at the same time as a recession. If you go to places like Daytona Beach, you'll see all these dinosaur construction projects that you can tell, 20 years ago was somebody's golden dream, and there's a 30-story building, huge, huge condo, never got finished, and now it's rusting and crumbling
You see a lot of that in Mexico.
because the gamble that people are taking. It's like when you build an aircraft carrier, you design it, you finally get funding, you build the aircraft carrier, all the conditions have changed.
Yeah, that's
So now,
exactly what goes on in real estate because it takes so long to line up the financing and the permitting process is so time consuming, especially for large projects, that it can be 48 months or 60 months before from the time you first apply and get the project underway to the time that you're breaking ground. And by then, the economic conditions may have changed drastically.
and then in
And,
Florida, you can have even a minor hurricane hit, and it like throws like a 90-day kneecap into the project. And guys that are already shoestringing, and the financiers of these projects who are already like on short terms they're not getting the 90 days. Their suppliers are saying cash on delivery, and then you throw a hurricane in and they're dead. And so these buildings, by the time nobody's going to buy them because 5 years later they're rusting before they're even finished, and they are blight on the skyline. So right now in Florida, the real estate market is absolutely turned over. Houses are being taken off the market by the realtors because it looks terrible when it says this house has been on the market for 280 days. So they'll like try to take it off the market, rebrand it, and try to uh, do some kind of ledger domain so that it doesn't look like the same guy is putting it on the market again. So they can start fresh like it's a new listing. But when housing prices start going down, it's a real bad sign at least in Florida and probably in Arizona too.
Well, that's what I was
I
telling.
know Las Vegas is like that big time.
I was telling a friend of mine in Ohio, because we were talking about, I'm so freaking perturbed. If anybody listens to me regularly about what this Brown Stadium, this new football stadium that they're building, and they're putting in the suburbs, and it's a $2.4 billion project with
oh my God.
$600 million subsidized taxpayer money that the governor, DeWine, found some type of fund with the $600 million sitting in it that they're going to use to start this project. It's a dome, which I laugh because they don't even play in January because the team sucks. So what the hell do they need a dome for? And people are all, they're like, some are excited about this. And
Well,
I said, well, let me just add this. I said, my thing with it too, though, because of living here, because I got here in '06 in Phoenix and then the housing market crashed in '08. To your point, Matt, they built off ramps for freeways that they just stopped. They never finished. So I could see a scenario where they could start the stadium and, people back there, they don't know, they weren't hit as hard as we were in Phoenix or in Florida, where, the property values went from $500,000 to $200,000 in 2008 here. Like it was unbelievable. So people were walking away. That was one of the reasons why they were walking away from their homes, or the main reason. So the idea of like projects getting started and then just stop. And I'll give you one more. They built an outdoor mall here, and it was going to be the mall. It was going to have Saks, Bloomingdale's, Nordstrom. Those were all going to be anchors in this shopping center. Housing market 2008, the crash, they all backed out. So all the small businesses that opened up in there thinking they're going to be ahead of the curve, they were left there to die.
Yeah, and I don't know which of your guests, because I'm not good at keeping track of that, but somebody that was on talking about, I think it was mainly real estate. And I never even thought about this. So your podcast, other podcasts are really great for just opening my eyes to things, and everybody in general, that we would have never thought about. These school bond issues can put an entire town into a crushing debt, a doom loop debt and the entire bond issue can be rammed through by a handful of politicians that are involved in some kind of graft, in-laws got the construction company, whatever. But the people that are in a county, they may go to vote and maybe only 10% of the people vote. Do you vote to, have great schools in, bum squat county, or are you a troglodyte that doesn't want great schools? It's like, sure, I want great schools. So you check yes, I vote yes for the bond issue. The whole thing gets put on the ballot by like 20 hustlers. It's on the ballot. Only 10% of people go to vote in this, off midterm special election. Who votes in them? I mean, who goes out to vote for them? People that are paid to vote, that are rounded up to vote. But the whole county is now going to be on the hook for billions of dollars that are completely can never be paid back. This funding is going to be a complete mirage, supposedly to pay the teachers more or whatever, but we're just adding debt on top of debt on top of debt. And when just like the real estate market, when it's a rising tide, all boats are lifted and you can buy lots of condos and everybody thinks they're going to get rich, leveraging on the way up. But when you get into a deflationary spiral and nobody can afford these things, in an inflationary spiral, it's like, great, we're going to pay off our debt with cheaper dollars. In a deflation, which we may be going into first, in a deflation, you can't pay anything. And you go bust, and then it's the great taking time where you find out who really owns the paper.